Carl Jung identified 8 signs of an extremely rare personality type, and if you recognize even half of these traits, you're part of what I call the psychological elite. In his decades of research, Jung discovered that less than 5% of the population develops what he called differentiated consciousness, a way of experiencing reality that most people never achieve. But here's what's fascinating. These rare individuals often spend their entire lives thinking something is wrong with them. Jung documented case after case of people with extraordinary psychological depth who had been convinced by society that their intensity, their sensitivity, and their refusal to accept shallow answers were character flaws rather than signs of exceptional mental sophistication. The most shocking part, Jung realized these rare personalities aren't just different, they're evolutionarily advanced. They represent humanity's next stage of consciousness development. Join me as we explore these 8 definitive signs of rare personality types. If you recognize yourself in these patterns, everything you've been told about being too much will finally make sense because you're not too much for the world. The world is too little for you. Here's what Jung discovered that modern psychology still refuses to acknowledge. The traits that make you feel like an outsider aren't defects, they're upgrades. You're not broken. You're a breakthrough. Jung wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But what if who you truly are doesn't fit into society's narrow definitions of normal? What if your intensity, your depth, and your refusal to settle for surface-level existence are evidence of advanced psychological architecture? Think about this from an evolutionary perspective. Throughout history, the individuals who pushed humanity forward were the ones who couldn't accept the status quo. They questioned everything, felt everything, and saw possibilities that others couldn't even imagine. But here's the tragic irony. Society teaches these exceptional individuals to suppress their greatest strengths. You've probably been told you're too sensitive, too intense, or too complicated. But Jung understood that these supposed flaws are actually signs of psychological differentiation, the rare ability to perceive and process reality at levels most people never develop. Sign 1. You experience emotional depth that feels almost supernatural. Jung discovered something remarkable about emotional intensity. He found that certain individuals don't just feel emotions, they experience what he called affect-toned complexes that create profound psychological resonance. You don't just have feelings. Feelings move through you like symphonies, each one carrying layers of meaning that others can't access. This isn't emotional instability, it's emotional sophistication. When you feel deeply, you're not overreacting. You're accessing what Jung called the objective psyche, layers of human experience that most people have learned to suppress. You feel the unspoken tension in rooms before anyone says a word. You carry the emotional undercurrents of every interaction because your psyche is wired for depth, not surface-level pleasantries. Sign 2. You question reality with sacred curiosity. According to Jung, most people live unconscious lives. They accept social programming without examination. But you can't help but dig deeper. Jung would have recognized you as someone with an active thinking function that refuses to accept surface explanations. You don't just ask what, you ask why. Why do people stay in relationships that diminish them? Why do we accept systems that don't serve human flourishing? Why do we pretend shallow conversations constitute meaningful connections? Jung called this the transcendent function, the psychological ability to see beyond current limitations. While others accept the status quo, you're already envisioning what could be different, what could be more authentic, and what could honor the full spectrum of human potential. But here's what's fascinating. Your questions threaten others' comfortable illusions. When you ask deep questions, you're not just seeking answers. You're challenging the psychological defenses that keep people feeling safe in their limitations. Sign 3. You've developed conscious independence. Jung said, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." You've learned to do exactly this, not by choice, but by psychological necessity. Your independence isn't a defensive mechanism, it's an achievement. You've learned through experience that depending on others for your sense of worth is psychological quicksand. So you built yourself from the ground up. Jung called this process individuation, the psychological journey toward becoming whole. Most people never complete this journey because it requires facing what Jung termed the shadow, all the parts of yourself you've been taught to reject. Your solitude isn't loneliness. It's a sanctuary. It's where you remember who you are beneath all the roles and expectations. Sign 4. You possess hyper-perceptive awareness. Jung revolutionized psychology when he identified intuition as a legitimate psychological function. He said, "Intuition is perception via the unconscious that brings forth ideas, images, and possibilities." You don't just observe people, you read their psychological signatures. You notice micro-expressions, energy shifts, and the words they don't say. When someone says they're fine, but their entire energetic field screams distress, you can't unsee it. This isn't paranoia, it's psychological sensitivity operating at a level that most people never develop. But Jung warned that if you don't learn to protect this sensitivity, it will exhaust you. Sign 5. You crave meaning over everything else. Jung discovered that certain personalities are psychologically incapable of living inauthentic lives. You don't choose meaning over popularity, your psyche demands it. You've probably tried living for external validation, following scripts, and playing expected roles. But Jung would have recognized the symptoms immediately. That gnawing emptiness, that sense of betraying something essential, that quiet desperation beneath any applause. According to Jung, when you live against your psychological type, you don't just feel uncomfortable, you develop neurotic symptoms. Your psyche literally rebels against inauthenticity. You can't pretend that shallow goals matter. You can't get excited about achievements that lack substance. You can't build relationships based on convenience rather than connection. Your psychological makeup won't allow it. Sign 6. You've outgrown people and environments repeatedly. Jung said, "The greatest tragedy of the family is the unlived lives of the parents." But what happens when you refuse to live an unlived life? You've likely experienced the painful realization that people who once knew you don't anymore. Not because you've become difficult, but because you've shed layers of conditioning that no longer serve you. Jung called this process psychological death and rebirth. The friends who knew you when you were shrinking, when you were people-pleasing, when you were suppressing your truth, they remember that version of you. Sometimes they want that version back because it felt safer and more predictable. But you can't go back. Jung understood that psychological evolution is irreversible. Once you've seen behind the curtain of social conditioning, you can't return to unconscious conformity. Sign 7. You create transformational presence. Jung said, "The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. When someone speaks to you, they feel seen. Particularly, you don't just listen to words, you perceive underlying emotional states. You don't offer quick fixes, you offer deep witnessing. You don't rush to judgment, you create space for truth to emerge." Jung understood that this level of presence is actually a form of psychological healing. But people with this gift often exhaust themselves by giving it too freely. You become so skilled at holding space for others that you forget to ask for space to be held yourself. Sign 8. You sense a purpose that can't be defined yet. Jung said, "Your vision becomes clear when you look into your heart. Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakens." If you feel a persistent sense that you're meant for something more than the ordinary, Jung would have recognized this as the transcendent function, your psyche's drive toward individuation and purpose. You feel it, that restless knowing that you have something to contribute, something to build, something to express. It might not be clear yet, but it's undeniable. This isn't about fame or recognition. It's about alignment, the psychological necessity of living in harmony with your deepest nature. Jung warned about something crucial that most people with rare personalities never learn. You must integrate your shadow, or your gifts become your prison. Even rare personalities have unconscious aspects that can sabotage their growth. Jung identified several shadow patterns. The superiority complex, seeing your rarity as evidence that you're better than others. The messianic shadow, believing it's your job to wake up everyone around you. The martyrdom shadow, thinking that being rare means being destined to suffer. True psychological rarity includes the wisdom to know when to share your gifts and when to preserve them, when to lead and when to follow, and when to speak truth and when to remain silent. Here's what Jung understood that changes everything. With psychological rarity comes responsibility. You're not just different for your own benefit, you're different in service of human evolution. Jung believed that individuals with rare personalities serve as bridges between the unconscious and conscious realms of human experience. Through your depth, your questions, and your refusal to accept shallow answers, you help humanity grow. This is why you can't settle for ordinary. This is why surface-level connections feel empty. This is why you'd rather be alone than pretend. Your psyche knows you have work to do, and that work requires authenticity, depth, and courage. Your sensitivity isn't a weakness to be managed, it's intelligence to be applied. Your intensity isn't too much, it's exactly what certain situations require. Your refusal to settle isn't difficult, it's necessary for the evolution of consciousness. Jung made a startling prediction about rare personalities. As humanity evolves, more people will develop these traits. What's rare now will become more common as our species grows in psychological sophistication. But that means you're not just personally rare, you're evolutionarily important. You represent what Jung called the leading edge of human consciousness, pioneering ways of being that others will eventually follow. Every time you felt like an outsider, you were actually scouting new territory for human potential. Every time you've been criticized for being too much, you were demonstrating possibilities that threatened limited worldviews. Every time you've chosen authenticity over acceptance, you've expanded what's possible for human relationships. Jung's final insight about rare personalities was both challenging and liberating. You must learn to love your rarity without needing others to understand it. The goal isn't to make everyone see how special you are. The goal is to embody your gifts so fully that you become a living example of what's possible when someone embraces their authentic nature completely. Remember what Jung identified about extremely rare personalities. These 8 signs aren't just individual traits, they're evidence of advanced psychological architecture. If even half of these signs resonated with you, you're not just different. You're part of what Jung believed was humanity's next evolutionary step. You're one of the people pushing our species toward greater awareness, deeper truth, and more authentic connection. Yes, it's lonely sometimes. Yes, it requires more courage than most people will ever need. But Jung believed that people like you are essential for humanity's psychological evolution. Your intensity isn't too much, it's exactly what the world needs to shake off its comfortable numbness. Your sensitivity isn't a weakness, it's a strength that allows you to perceive what others miss. Your refusal to settle isn't difficult, it's necessary for progress. The world doesn't need you to be smaller, quieter, or more convenient. The world needs you to be exactly what you are, psychologically rare and proud of it. You're not too much. The world is too little, and Jung knew that people like you are the ones who change that.